There, how about that? Sorry.
Much better.
We'll go ahead and call the annual budget hearing meeting to order with a roll call.
Doug Bailey,
Here.
Marge Jorgensen, here. Tony Platt,
Here.
John Cross,
Here.
Laura Lorwick, here. Lisa Panzer,
Here.
Jack Ruby,
Here.
Gary Spielman, here. Joanne Podesta.
Here.
All right, we'll turn it over to Anne Marie.
All right. So, 2020-21 budget hearing. So this is just kind of a reminder. So we adopted the preliminary budget for this fiscal year in July, which allowed us to start spending money prior to the actual budget being adopted. We will adopt what's called the original budget and set the tax levy tonight. By law, that's required to be done by November 1st. And then we have to certify the tax levy to each of the municipalities within the district by November 10th. So looking at the revenue side first. So the things that primarily affect the changes in our revenue and in Fund 10, which is the general fund. So enrollment, which this year, the third Friday in September was September 18th. So third Friday and summer school FTE membership. So those are the two enrollments that affect the revenue limit. So just a reminder that we look at that 3-year rolling average for those. And then that is what affects our revenue limit because it's based on a per member number. And we'll look at each of these in the following slides, but just highlighting the changes. Private school vouchers, so we find out those numbers on October 15th each year. Those also affect our revenue limit, so they provide a non-recurring exemption to the revenue limit. So those include, for us, the Wisconsin Parental Choice Program and the Special Needs Scholarship Program. There are 2 other choice programs in the state, but those are in Milwaukee and Racine. Equalization aid, so that's the general state aid that we get. So we receive that number also on October 15th, and that affects the tax levy. So after we calculate the total revenue limit, equalization aid makes up part of it, and then the rest of it is what becomes taxes that we're able to levy for. And then property values, those numbers come out from the Wisconsin Department of Revenue on October 1st each year. So the equalized property value for all the properties within the district affect the revenue limits, and then the computer aid and personal property aid also play into the revenue limit amount, and we'll talk about all of those. So looking at enrollment, you can see that we've had a trend over the past 10 or so years of going down slightly each year. So our revenue limit membership for the current year is 3,366. So we are down from last year, but in general, across the state, enrollment is down 3%. So we're not the only district seeing this. So it's been pretty typical, and where we've been seeing it and where districts across the state are seeing it are in lower numbers of incoming students. So 4K, kindergarten, and then last year we graduated out a fairly large senior class, and with the smaller classes coming in, that's why we continue to see the declining enrollment. So looking at that 3-year rolling average that we were talking about, which is made up of our September count and then our summer school FTE count. So last year, the 3-year rolling average was 3,432. This year, that 3-year average is 3,414. So we had a decrease in 18 FTE as far as revenue limit membership. So looking at the choice program, the Wisconsin Parental Choice Program, so that is what allows students who live within our district to attend a private school that participates in the WPCP, to attend that school and then basically have tax dollars follow them so the school receives that funding. So it's broken into 2 different levels, and those levels each receive, 9-12 receives slightly more per pupil than K-8. So last year our K-8 numbers were 27.1. This year we have 43.1 students participating in the Wisconsin Parental Choice Program at the K-8 level. We don't know exactly where they're going. However, we do know that St. Catherine Drexel's had an increase of 15 students who are participating in the program at their school this year, and St. Stephen's had an increase of 4 students. So those students aren't necessarily coming from within our district. They could be coming from another district and going to those schools, but it's likely that our students are making up a fair amount of those increases based on the numbers that we're seeing. And then at the high school level, we actually saw a decrease of 2 FTE students. The Special Needs Scholarship Program, we have the same, it's 3 FTE this year, and it was 3 FTE last year, so there's really no change there. So the resident district's revenue limit, which is us, we get to increase our revenue limit. It's a non-recurring exemption for the students who participate in both of those programs. So last year, our non-recurring exemption for the WPCP was $357,118.60. This year, it is quite a bit higher, $482,974. So basically what happens is we, as the resident district, get to add that money to our revenue limit, which means we get to tax for it. But then we turn around and we basically cut a check to the state, and they give that money to the private schools who have our students participating in the program at their schools. So we get to increase our taxes, but then we pay it right back out. So we don't see anything for having those students, but that's how the money gets to the private schools. That's the same vehicle that they use for the Special Needs Scholarship Program, but really not much change from last year to this year because the total FTE didn't change. Equalization aid. So this is the general aid that we get from the state. So the aid that we receive is impacted by local factors, including membership, shared costs per pupil, and property values, as well as state factors, which is the total money that the legislature has made available for general aid, the shared cost ceilings that are established, and then the state property values per member. So it's a relatively complicated formula at the state level, but it's intended to ensure that all districts are able to be funded and be able to provide a relatively equal education to all students across the state. So I showed 3 years of what we had received for equalization aid. During 2018-19, $22,192,637. And then last year, we saw somewhat of an increase, $22,629,713. This year, we're actually looking at an increase of almost $1 million, $984,296. So that's a 4.35% increase over last year. So basically what that means is looking at the total revenue limit that we have, there's going to be a larger share of that that's going to come from the state, which means a lesser share of that will be provided through property taxes. So property values, the district's, there you go, equalized valuation on properties in the district increased by 5.22% over last year's valuation. Last year, we had seen a 6.45% increase over the prior year, so it continues to increase, and this is slightly over what the state saw for their total increase over last year. It was just over 5%, so we're slightly above the state. Another part that plays into property values is the state aid for exempt computers, so that covers computer software and related equipment. So that makes up $38,691. There's no change on that from last year. That's the same. And then the state aid for exempt personal property. So that includes machinery, tools, and patterns that are not manufacturing property. So this year we're looking at $202,090. Last year it was $220,523. So that decrease is actually because in 2019, the personal property exemption that was given to us by the state was too high. So we received a letter this past August stating that basically now they were going to make up for it by decreasing what our personal property exemption should be by that amount. So that's why we're seeing this decrease, is they're basically self-correcting from 2019, and they're going to take it back in 2021. So this looks at this year's budget and then the last 2 years, so we can see how things have changed a little bit. So revenue limit, you can see how the revenue limit has gone up, went up from 1819 to 1920, and now it's gone up again. Part of that increase in the revenue limit has to do with the state setting, they increase, there's a low revenue ceiling per pupil, and so we were slightly below that, and so this year it's $10,000, so we were able to increase our revenue limit per pupil to get us up to that, as well as an additional increase in revenue limit per pupil. So that explains why this year's revenue limit is, here we go, is higher than last year's. So our equalization aid, as we saw, is going up by just under $1 million. Computer aid is the same, personal property aid. And then what's left is the amount that we're able to levy for. And that amount gets broken out between Fund 38, which is our non-recurring, or sorry, our non-referendum debt, and then the Fund 10 levy. And so if you look at our Fund 38 levy from last year to this year, you'll see an increase. That has to do with the $5 million that we took out last year as part of the 5-year facility plan. So we are now starting to make payments on that debt. So what that means is our Fund 38 levy is going to be higher, but because Fund 38 and Fund 10 share that same amount, that drives our Fund 10 levy slightly lower. So that kind of explains the offset there. The asterisk in the second column is because if you add up the whole numbers, they're rounded, so it's off by $1, but DPI does the rounding, so these are the numbers they came up with. But in case anybody's calculating, that's why there's an asterisk. So the levy recommendation would be to levy the full amounts for Fund 10 and 38 up to the revenue limit, to levy $750,000 for Fund 10, or sorry, Fund 80, to fully support existing and additional community programming, and to fund the maintenance of community facilities. So that was part of the 5-year facility plan, was redoing some of those facilities, and so in order to ensure that we have enough funding to make that happen, that's the levy that we're recommending. And then to levy an additional $1.425 million in Fund 39, so that is our referendum debt, to be used for future payments. So the reason that we're recommending this is in years where you might otherwise see a decrease in, where you have the ability to kind of fill in with additional money. So this can help balance the mill rate in future years. If we had a year where we didn't get as much funding from the state, or we had other things that were driving the taxes up, we wouldn't have to levy the full amount for those Fund 39 payments, and then that would be used to help lower the taxes. This money it's set aside. It can only be used for Fund 39, and actually it can help to gain interest until we need to use it for payments. So it's a good way to kind of ensure that you don't see a big swing in your mill rate and your taxes during the years. So if we did that, that would bring the mill rate for 2020, 2021 to $8.99. So last year the mill rate was $9.04, so this would be a 5-cent decrease. So this chart shows levy by fund. So the funds are color-coded, as you can see on the right-hand side, and this just shows kind of the trend that we've seen over the years. And then across the top is the mill rate. So you'll notice that prior to fiscal year 18, we didn't have a Fund 39 levy. That was when we approved the referendum for the high school. So that's the increase that you see in the mill rate there is when we had to start paying back on that debt. But since then, we've been gradually lowering the mill rate, which is a positive thing to do. Most districts haven't necessarily passed their budgets yet. Quite a few of them are doing it tonight because the deadline is coming. So the mill rates that we have are looking at last year's, and then knowing what ours would be, we can compare to that. So this is looking at last year's mill rates. So you can see at the top at 904, we were slightly above two of what we would consider to be districts in our area, but pretty competitive with the rest of them, and certainly below the state average for K-12 districts. So looking at $8.99 as a mill rate for next year should keep us competitive. So on the expenditure side, this is just a snapshot of the budget for approval that's out in the folder, but this looks at Fund 10, which is mostly the expenditures that we can have the most control over. So really not a lot of change in terms of, it's basically what we expected. So under instruction, so these are functions, which means it's basically what was the expenditure for. So within most of those instruction functions is where you'll find most of our certified staff salaries and benefits. So if you look at the subtotal for instruction, we invested a lot of money in the staff this year with the new compensation plan that was put into place. So seeing that increase from last year to this year is expected. There's kind of one line to maybe call out if anybody's trying to explain why there's a big change. If you look at the, it's under support sources, the 250000 for business administration, you'll notice that last year's was significantly higher than the previous year, and now it's back down again. That was where the expenditures were for the middle school car accident. So that was over $2 million worth of repairs there. And that's the function that gets coded to. So that's why that amount is kind of an anomaly as far as being high. The interfund transfer, the 410 under the non-program transactions, that's the amount that gets transferred to the special education fund, or Fund 27 each year, because that fund has to have a zero balance at the end of the year. And this is a pie chart, so this looks at funds 10, 27, 50, and 80. So 10 is the general fund, 27 is special ed, Fund 50 is food service, and Fund 80 is community fund. We don't include either of the debt funds in there because those would kind of offset. They're pure debt. So all that they would contribute to is the debt retirement piece of the pie. So if we actually want to look at our operating expenses, that's what this looks at. So you can see salaries and benefits make up the largest part of our expenditures. And then purchase services, that includes our transportation, that includes our food service contract that we have, that includes tuition for any students that we send out of district. And then non-capital objects and capital objects. Non-capital are supplies. Capital objects would be bigger pieces of equipment. Debt retirement is in there because we do have leases for primarily for our technology. And then insurance and judgments, we don't actually have any judgments, so that's strictly our insurance costs for property insurance, liability insurance, workers' comp. So then this is a summary of all funds. So this shows total dollars coming in and going out. The asterisk there, it does not include the interfund transfer because basically that would be double counting the revenues and expenditures from that. So this is net of that. So you can see total revenues from 18-19, 19-20, and then budgeted. So the increase in last year's revenues was due to that $5 million that we issued in debt. So that money was a pure revenue coming in. So that's why you'll see that that year looks higher than the prior year and then this year's budget as well. And then total expenditures, the 18-19, we still had some spending from the high school renovation project that was happening. So that's why that year is higher than 19-20. And then total tax levy, so 18-19, you can see that between 18-19 and 19-20, it did go up. And then total tax levy from 19-20 to this year will be going up as well. But you can see that the mill rate over the past 3 years has been declining. So I will open it up to questions.
Anne Marie, can you just clarify how does school choice affect the bottom line that the taxpayers see in their property tax?
So
Did you get my bit?
I did okay. Hear it, yeah. So for the, I'll go back to that slide. So for the choice program, so basically those students, they live within our district, but they're choosing or they're selecting to go to a school that is participating in the WPCP. So as far as revenue limit goes, those numbers get added back into our revenue limit. And so we get to tax for them as though they were our students. So even though they're not attending our schools, the total revenue limit or what we can tax goes up because we do get to count them. But then what happens is we then turn around and that money for those students that we tax gets paid directly, or it gets paid to the school. It goes through the state, but it goes to the school that they are attending. So for us, we get the money in and the money goes right back out. But it increases the amount of the taxes, because otherwise, if those students were in our district, we would get to keep the money, but if they were just attending the school and not participating in the program, we wouldn't be taxing for them. So it's a way of getting that tax money to those schools. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
I just wanted to clarify that we do count it into our tax levy, and then the money that we actually get for those students based on that formula for school choice goes to the school choice.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Other questions? All right. Well, thank you, Anne Marie. With that, we'll move to adjourn. Somebody.
So moved.
Motion and a second then to adjourn. All in favor? Aye. Aye. All right. Got about 4 or 5 minutes here.